Hi, my name is Jess and welcome to my channel, Reads with a Ravenclaw. It's been such a long time since I uploaded and I'm really sorry for that. It's been a hectic few weeks and I'm gonna have more hectic weeks to come because in like 2 weeks time I'm moving to university and I don't know how that's gonna upset my filming schedule, as though there's been a schedule for the past like month. Yeah, it's been a really long time. How have you guys been? Have you been watching Game of Thrones season 7? I hope you've been watching Game of Thrones season 7 because that is all I've been able to think about for the past few weeks. But today is not to talk about TV. Today I would like to talk to you about all of the books that I read this August. I've read 6 things this month which I'm super happy with, so let's just get into the discussion of them. The first thing that I read this month was The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. This is a short story collection and all of the short stories in it are based on, inspired by, draw on different fairy tales. It's very dark, it's very vivid. Angela Carter focuses a lot on themes to do with sexuality, to do with love, to do with womanhood, basically. My favourite thing about this collection was definitely the writing style. Angela Carter has such a rich way with words and she paints such vivid, beautiful pictures that I think really merge well with the whole fairy tale-esque feel of the book. However, I did also have some issues with it. I felt like a lot of the stories were not on a similar strength level. Like, I loved the first story in the collection. I can't remember the name of it right now. I think it might have been The Bloody Chamber. I thought that was very well written. But there were some in this collection that I just felt lacked. They didn't lack substance, but they lacked a similar punch. They didn't pack as much of a punch as some of the other stories did, and that meant that sometimes I felt like the quality of the short stories were not consistent throughout. That being said, overall I still really enjoyed it and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing I read this month was a poetry collection that I do not currently have a copy of with me because I borrowed it from the local library, and that was Serious Concerns by Wendy. So I have just finished my A-levels and one of the poems that I had to study as part of an anthology for both AS level and A-level was After the Lunch by Wendy, and it was one of my favourite poems in the anthology. It is very, it's quite light, it's quite humorous. I just really like the tone of it and that made me really excited to pick up this collection and I really did enjoy it. If you're somebody who doesn't read a lot of poetry but would like to read more, I think Wendy is a very good place to start. She's not about like flowery language and metaphors and similes. She's not about like, you know, these really obscure choices of imagery. She's very to the point, very straightforward, and she has just such a great humorous yet honest tone. I really feel like Wendy rejects pretentiousness in her collection and just says it how it is. An example of this is this really short poem which I'll read for you now because it's a couple of sentences long and it's called 2 Cures for Love, and I'm going to read it off my phone because I've just found it on the internet, and it is 1. Don't see him. Don't phone or write a letter. 2. The easy way. Get to know him better. So as you can hear from that, it's simple rhymes, it's simple language, yet it still is just really fun to read and has this very honest feel to it, and I ended up giving that poetry collection a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read this month is another one that I got from the library and so don't have a copy of with me here, and it is Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. Where'd You Go, Bernadette is about this young woman called Bee and her mother Bernadette, and Bee gets like straight A's in her report card and her reward for this is supposed to be going on a family trip to Antarctica. However, Bernadette disappears before this trip can go ahead, and Bee puts together all of this different evidence from emails to letters to newspaper articles to try and work out where her mother has gone. And that is how the story is told for the most part. It's mostly told through letters and emails and things like that. Even though there are sections of it which are prose, a lot of it is through these different mediums. This definitely wasn't my favourite book that I read this month. It was one of those books that I read and I didn't feel like I hated it, but I definitely felt like I wanted more from it and that there were things that could have been done a bit better. I liked the fact that it was a story in which a mother was not treated as if a mother was all she is, and that's not saying that a mother isn't a wonderful thing to be, but I definitely feel like sometimes in literature when you have a mother character, they are sometimes not explored outside of what it is to be a mother. And I quite like that Bernadette is explored as a person and not just who she is in relation to Bee. And it's definitely more Bernadette's story than it is Bee's story, and I quite enjoyed that. So the fact that Maria Semple takes characters and goes in different directions with them than I was expecting. I definitely don't like like it when character arcs are super predictable, or where I can see or understand right away where a character's going to go. But I did feel like a lot of the characters bordered on pretentious, especially Bernadette herself. And whilst the combination of like letters and emails with prose was interesting, it could feel a bit jarring. It did feel like a little bit forced and jolty in places, and that could take me out of the story a little bit as well. So overall, I ended up giving Where'd You Go, Bernadette a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read this month is up here. I put it up for decoration, and when I take it away you're going to see my copy of High School Musical 2 behind it, so just ignore that please. So that book is Lady Susan by Jane Austen, and this book is a very special book that I read this month because it's one of the books that I have to read for university. It's one of the books that was on my reading list and that I'm meant to read before term starts. So you know, I might be doing a video soon where I talk about all of the books that I've had to order for my reading list for my first year of university, because Reading Bukowski did a similar video to that all through her years at university, and I loved them, so I might be drawing inspiration from that soon. I've officially read Lady Susan and I enjoyed it. Again, there were bits of it that I wasn't too keen on, but I think they'll be a really interesting book to study. Lady Susan is an epistolary novel. I can't say that word, so I know I probably said it wrong. Don't judge me. But yeah, it's told through letters, and it kind of all surrounds this character of Lady Susan, who is dubbed like the most famous coquette in London. She's known for flirting with men, for enticing them away from like respectable marriages or whatever, you know, all of the scandalous stuff. And basically these letters kind of start when Lady Susan arrives at her brother and sister-in-law's house after fleeing London when being accused of flirting with a married man. This is very, very different from all of the other Jane Austen books I've read. I've read 3 of her novels. I've read Pride and Prejudice, Persuasion and Emma, and yeah, they're just very different. I think this is a very early book written in Jane Austen's career, and you can definitely see how she's developed as a novelist since then, and how maybe this style of writing, this epistolary style of writing, isn't as well suited to her. I definitely found the character of Lady Susan extremely interesting, extremely dynamic, and I quite enjoyed the letter form and the way that she, you know, manoeuvred all of these ties. As with all Jane Austen books, there's a very big cast of characters with all of these different ties and prejudices, and that's always fun to read about, and that's always something that I look forward to in her books. Would have liked it if it had gone on a bit longer. I feel like it's cut quite short. I feel like we don't really get to hit points that we should hit in Lady Susan's character arc, and for that reason I ended up also giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read this month was Seconds by Bryan Ijeawele, which is a graphic novel about a woman called Katie who owns a restaurant and is going to open another restaurant, and she finds out that if she messes up in her day, she could essentially turn back time and have a do-over by writing down her mistake and swallowing a magic mushroom. It is as weird as it sounds, but it's also as amazing as it sounds. I'm not really a graphic novel reader. I don't read very many graphic novels, so I don't have much experience with what is and what isn't a good graphic novel, but in terms of the impression it made on me as a reader, I thought that this was well written. I thought that the illustrations were beautiful, and I really liked the sort of dark, creepy tone that it took on, because that wasn't a direction I expected it to go in, and it was a really interesting direction to go in. I think the themes and the idea of if you had a chance to do things over, would you? Just really fun and interesting ones to explore, and Bryan Ijeawele explores them very intelligently and very, very engagingly. It was a lot of fun to read about. I'm just gonna like flicker through and show you a couple of like the sketches so you can get an idea of like the colour and the drawing style, because I absolutely loved it. I thought that it was beautifully, beautifully done. Graphic novels are definitely pricier than paperbacks, but you can find this for discounted rates on different internet bookstores, so I definitely recommend looking around, because this was such a wonderful and fun novel to read, and I ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. And the final thing I read this month was Dear Ijeawele, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is a very short non-fiction book, but it definitely packs a punch. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's friend gave birth to a daughter and wrote her a letter asking how to raise that daughter as a feminist, and this book is essentially an edited version of that letter and of the 15 suggestions that she gave back to her friend. A lot of you have probably seen or heard of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's very famous TED Talk, which is We Should All Be Feminists. It's an absolutely wonderful TED Talk and you should definitely go and watch it. And I was expecting a lot of the same when I went into this book because of how, you know, it's the same sort of subject matter of feminism. But I think that whereas We Should All Be Feminists is a challenging kind of talk, as in it's, you know, it's challenging our perception of feminism. This one is more of like a basis of feminism. It's like the key lessons of feminism. It's talking about ways that girls traditionally view themselves and how we should maybe encourage our daughters and future generations to start seeing themselves. I think my favourite suggestion in here talks a lot about likeability and this idea that women are taught that they should be likeable and that they should be nice, and that sometimes this can be a very dangerous setup to have in your daughter's mind. And I just really like the way that she challenges typicality, and she challenges these sort of learnt lessons and these passed on lessons from women to their daughters in a way that isn't accusing women, but is definitely encouraging us to look at how we've been raised and look at the lessons that have been passed on and challenge them in a healthy and productive way. I wouldn't say that this is anything really new or like mind-boggling about feminism, because like I say, it is more about the general like foundations and just general things that can be done to help young women be raised as feminists, but I still found it to be massively influential, because I think sometimes where you have things like the pressure to be likeable, the pressure to be pretty, the pressure to find a husband so ingrained in society, it can sometimes be really helpful to go back to these initial lessons and to just think on them a little bit. This was an absolutely wonderful read, and I ended up giving it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. Go and check out her other TED Talk and also her books. I haven't read any of her books, but I assume that if they are anything as good as her non-fiction, they're going to be pretty damn great. So there you have it. Those are all of the books I read this month. I am so sorry that I haven't been more in touch in August. Like I say, I am hoping to sort that out and to become more in touch, even though things might be a little bit all over the place for the next few weeks of me moving into university. I'd absolutely love to hear about what you guys have been reading over this past month while I've just been completely like detached from the YouTube community, so please leave a comment below. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.